I'd like to talk briefly about absolute and relative poverty now. It's important that we consider both measures when looking at the issue of poverty. If we're talking about absolute poverty, we're talking about people who cannot afford to provide for their basic needs. They cannot afford basic food, basic shelter, even basic clothing. These people are living on an income that is classified by the World Bank as under $1.25 a day. $1.25 a day adjusted for PPP. So if you're living on less than $1.25 a day, you are classified as being in extreme absolute poverty. And you cannot afford to provide for your basic needs. If you're living under $2 a day, adjusted for PPP, then we say that you're in moderate absolute poverty. Either way, people living in these conditions are suffering from absolute poverty, and this still applies to hundreds of millions of people in the world today, living in parts of the world in absolute poverty. In many richer countries, absolute poverty is not so much the problem, the issue is that of relative poverty. You are said to be living in relative poverty if your household income is less than 50% of the median income in the country where you are residing. So, for example, if in your home country the median income, which is another way of saying average, it's the middle income in the income distribution, is $60,000. If you are living on $30,000 a year or less, when the median income is 60,000, you are said to be living in relative poverty. Relative poverty is still a problem in the world because people cannot afford to live a normal lifestyle by the standards of that country. So they may not be able to afford to educate their children properly. They may not be able to afford all healthcare services that are required. They may not be able to access the kinds of goods and services that are commonplace in that particular country. When looking at the issue of poverty, it's also important to look at the causes and consequences of poverty. And sometimes a cause of poverty can also be a consequence of poverty. One of the major causes of poverty is simply having a low income. So if you have a low income, if you are self-employed, or if you are working in agriculture, subsistence agriculture, this may cause you to be in poverty. In many poorer countries, people are surviving through subsistence agriculture, and that leads them to be in absolute poverty. In many richer countries, people are living in relative poverty due to working in low-paid jobs, sometimes in the gig economy, sometimes on zero-hour contracts, temporary positions, precarious unemployment, earning the minimum wage, which may in fact mean that they are living in relative poverty. A lack of education, leading to a lack of human capital, can lead to relative poverty or even absolute poverty. Unemployment can lead to absolute or relative poverty. A lack of capital in the form of inheritance or housing can lead to systematic, relative, or absolute poverty. Poverty also has important consequences for an economy. If you are living in poverty, the chances are that your children will also go on to live in poverty. We call this the poverty trap. You are often not able to provide the health or education that your children will need to escape poverty. It will lead to a lower standard of living for you and for your family. High levels of poverty in a country can undermine the standard of living for the whole nation, not just the individual and families concerned. It can reduce the nation's Human Development Index. Poverty can lead to a deterioration in the income distribution and an increase in income inequality in a nation. You often find that countries where there are high levels of poverty also have high levels of social issues and social problems such as crime, vandalism, often higher prison numbers per capita. So poverty has important consequences, and some of these consequences are also causes of future poverty. So individuals, families, and nations can get caught in a poverty trap.